Picture this. You fill up your pickup truck with leaded gas, then speed off as fast as you feel like. No seatbelt, cigarette dangling, a couple of kids bouncing around on the truck bed. All the while, you're watching planes spray pretty clouds of DDT over the alfalfa fields. Ah, the unregulated freedom of the 1960s. Anyway, here are the real stories about why that stuff got banned. The 1960s were all about convenience. That's when the processed food industry exploded.
I don't know what anybody knows about Cool Whip.
I read a 30-page dossier that fails to use the words fake whipped cream.
To make these new Franken foods more appealing than, foods found in nature, they needed to be colorful and eye-catching. That's where artificial food coloring came in. One of the most widely used was red dye number 2, which was made from, get this, petroleum. But hey, it was way cheaper than dyes made from plants. Cheaper means more convenient, right? At least for the food industry. In the 1960s, red dye number 2 was found in soft drinks, artificial juices, candy, cereal, those undeniably appealing maraschino cherries, alcoholic drinks, ice cream, and a wide assortment of shelf-stable powdered foods. Pretty things can't be bad for you, right? Or can they? Red dye had been used since the late 19th century, but in 1960, scientists began to make some disturbing connections. That year, Congress revised the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938 to ban edible chemicals with a demonstrated connection to cancer. But red dye number 2 somehow stayed on the market until a 1969 study by the Moscow Institute of Nutrition showed that lab rats that ate red dye number 2 developed tumors. Even so, the stuff wasn't banned until 1976. Back in the 1920s, leaded gasoline came on the market to solve the problem of engine knocking, which could be as simple as an alarmingly loud noise or the cause of catastrophic engine failure. General Motors engineers discovered that the chemical additive tetraethyl lead, known as TEL, prevented knocking altogether. Problem solved. So from the 1920s on, most gasoline used throughout the US was leaded. It remained the standard even after scientists discovered that kids exposed to the stuff had developmental problems, including impaired cognitive function. What were the people thinking? Probably something like, yeah, that's bad, but they're kids. They'll grow out of it. And hey, Americans loved driving, so they kept topping off their tanks with leaded fuel because it kept their gas guzzlers humming. Annoyingly, scientists wouldn't stop harping on the lead is bad thing. Science really ruins everything. Leaded gas polluted the air with, obviously, lead and other particles, and unleaded gas didn't, particularly when it was used in cars with catalytic converters. Problem solved. So in 1970, Congress passed the Clean Air Act, requiring cars to meet stricter emission standards and beginning the permanent phase-out of leaded gas. It took a while, though. Leaded gas wasn't banned in road vehicles until 1996, and it's still used in some airplane fuel. As for how bad the use of leaded gasoline actually was, a 2022 research report estimated that Americans who grew up in the leaded gas era collectively lost 824 million IQ points. For perspective, a normal IQ is 100 points. And if your IQ is high enough that you can figure out what all those lost brain cells cost the world, congratulations. All we know is that it was a tragedy.
Can I ask you why you're not wearing a seatbelt?
Seatbelts were installed in some cars well before the 1960s. They were just extremely unpopular and totally uncool. I mean, what if it got caught up on your smoky treat? In most cars, it cost extra, and few buyers were willing to spring for them. Installing them was one thing, using them was an entirely different story. Only an estimated 1% of drivers and passengers made it a habit to buckle up at the time.
I've never worn it before. I prefer to be free when I'm driving.
These were lap belts at the time, and some people claimed they could cause internal injuries. Others worried that should their car end up submerged, they'd drown if they were wearing a seatbelt. The idea that internal injuries and drowning were pointless considerations if one were unconscious or ejected from the car was eye-roll inducing. By 1968, federal law mandated the installation of seatbelts in all new cars, but again, nobody said you had to use them. Three-point or shoulder belt installation became the law of the land in 1974. But again, rider's choice. In the 1960s, being able to move about the vehicle or hang out in the back of pickup trucks or the way back or cargo area of station wagons wasn't out of the ordinary.
They did what?
Finally, that buzzkill state, New York, passed the first law requiring drivers and passengers in front seats to wear seatbelts in 1984. But as of 2025, seatbelt laws are state matters, and true to their live free or die motto, New Hampshire still doesn't mandate their use by anyone over 18. Clackers were never amongst the biggest Christmas toy crazes in history, but they sold well and consistently throughout the late 1960s. Despite being one of the most dangerous toys ever sold to the public, Clackers, also known as knockers, click-clacks, and other onomatopoeia-rich names, were a decidedly low-tech plaything. The toy consists of, well, you can see, but yeah, it's just two small, very hard balls suspended on a string with a plastic or metal loop in the middle. The object was to swing the clacker around until the balls crashed into each other with a loud cracking noise. Clackers were sort of the mid-20th century version of fidget spinners, but a hell of a lot noisier and, spoiler alert, way more dangerous. It was fun to move those balls around, as fun as it was hazardous. The spheres, which were essentially projectiles, flew around with such unpredictability that kids maimed themselves and others, either accidentally or on purpose. There's no record, of course, but the number of black eyes, nosebleeds, and permanent grudges was undoubtedly high. Clacker balls also had a tendency to break upon impact, sending shards of sharp plastic every which way, like shrapnel. The FDA warned the public about using clackers in 1971, and they were ultimately banned in many jurisdictions, although you can still buy safer clacker derivatives in 2025, some of which are marketed as stress relievers. Problem solved. It took a while for water companies to convince Americans to pay money for something that cost almost nothing coming out of the kitchen faucet, but they played the long game. The commercialization process began when France debuted bottled mineral water in the late 1960s. Before then, if someone wanted a glass of water or needed one, since it's vital for sustaining life, they'd go to a faucet, head to a well, or take a deep gulp from the garden hose if they were outside and it was especially hot. It was a more innocent time. Americans in the 1960s lived in blissful ignorance about the state of their water, not to bag on the hose children of today. There's something about the vintage flavor of hose water that really tickles the tongue. Anyway, enough nostalgia. Water standards instituted in 1962 looked for only 28 contaminants. Between agricultural and industrial runoff and raw sewage making its way into the freshwater supply, we don't think any of us want to know what was being consumed back then. It was so bad that in 1969, the Cuyahoga River caught fire, and it wasn't the first time. Now, we'll say that again so it sinks in. The water caught fire. Eventually, the powers that be realized that nature wasn't going to filter the water by itself, and in 1972, the Clean Water Act was passed. These days, the Environmental Protection Agency monitors the water supply for 90 different contaminants, but as of 2025, controlling corporate pollution remains a work in progress. Back in the 1960s, it was up to states to determine the speed limit on their highways and surface roads. That number could run as high as 80 miles per hour in some places, a big difference from the 55 miles per hour that would be legally imposed a few years later. On country roads and in rural areas where traffic wasn't an issue and police were seldom watching, there were no posted speed limits. Drivers used the honor system. You were trusted to travel at a speed that felt reasonable. This practice laid the groundwork for what became known as the 85% rule. Assuming that 85% of drivers drive at what they feel is a safe, comfortable speed, that number becomes a basis for setting the speed limit for that stretch of road. The 85% rule failed to take into account the fact that people love to drive fast, but thankfully, although some would likely disagree, President Richard Nixon signed the Emergency Highway Energy Conservation Act in January 1974. It set a nationwide speed limit of 55 miles per hour that remained in effect until 1995, when the rights to establish speed limits was returned to the states. Now, a lot of that had to do with the oil embargoes, plural, going on, but people driving like maniacs played into it too. Flying insects can spread disease like typhus, malaria, and West Nile and destroy valuable crops. Luckily-ish, the pesticide DDT, with an 11-syllable chemical name we'd rather not pronounce, worked and worked well. Widespread U.S. use of DDT began in the late 1940s, and it continued to be heavily used in American agriculture throughout the 1960s. In 1962, conservationist Rachel Carson published Silent Spring, an expose detailing the little-known and majorly covered-up long-term side effects of DDT on the environment, humans, and wildlife. These effects are devastating. DDT doesn't stay put where you spray it. It sticks around, seeps into the ground and water, and eventually works its way up the food chain to humans. When humans ingest DDT, it can cause cancer and reproductive and developmental issues that can even be passed down through generations. After the Environmental Protection Agency was established in 1970, it took 2 more years to ban DDT in the US. But it's still used to combat mosquitoes in several countries, the largest of which is India. To be utterly fair, the banning of DDT is controversial. Just ask Africa. It's a complicated topic, and sometimes the cause and effect aren't really clear. Let's just move on. We'll save that for another video. Mercury is a heavy metal and chemical element also known as quicksilver, which makes it sound like a superhero. It even looks cool. At room temperature, mercury takes the form of a liquid and has many industrial and household uses. Its chemical symbol is Hg, which is from the Greek meaning silver water. H for H2O, and the G from Ag for silver. So now you know. Well, into the 1960s, it was a key ingredient in home thermometers. Liquid mercury encased in a thin tube of glass would rise and fall when placed under the tongue. Unfortunately, those tubes broke easily, and the liquid metal leaked out, broke up into little beads, and eventually evaporated. But it didn't go away. It stuck around in vapor form, and it's a neurotoxin. And if you don't know, neurotoxins are bad. Symptoms of mercury poisoning include difficulty breathing, coughing, and vomiting, just to name a few. The stuff wasn't limited to thermometers either. In the 1970s and 80s, toy giant Fisher-Price used mercury in the manufacture of many of its toys, including its Little People figures and playsets. Nothing like some fun and games with neurotoxins, right? So if you have any of those things lying around, you might want to keep them out of the grandchildren's hands and mouths. Mercury was eventually phased out of common products, including thermometers and toys, but it took a long time. Some states banned its use in the early 2000s, but by no means all of them. In the 1960s, cigarettes were the nicotine delivery method of choice, and nobody thought twice about firing up a heater anywhere, anytime. If that's hard to believe, here's a statistic. According to the American Lung Association, in 1965, 42% of American adults identified as everyday smokers. That's around 50 million people.
Winston tastes mighty good.
Like a cigarette should.
People smoked in restaurants and bars. If you were in the hospital being treated for lung disease and needed a cigarette, you could head to the gift shop and pick up a fresh pack. Yes, sometimes they didn't let you smoke in your room. All that oxygen lying around, probably. So hospitals had smoking lounges for patients and staff. There were even smoking rooms in schools.
Everybody else's tobacco is poisonous. Lucky Strikes is toasted.
Those health warnings on cigarette packs, they didn't exist yet. There was nothing bad about puffing away on a non-cancer causing, totally okay to inhale Virginia Slim.
The Slim cigarette for women only, tailored for the feminine hand. Slimmer than the fat cigarettes men smoke.
It was a good thing, according to all the TV commercials featuring Marlboro Men and even Fred Flintstone and Barney Rubble shilling Winstons.
You've earned yourself a Winston. Yeah, Winston. That's the one with filter blend up front.
If cartoon characters loved smoking, what could possibly be wrong with it? And just for a little perspective, here's a fun statistic. During the 60s, 11% of TV ads were for cigarettes, and those ads pumped $200 million 1960s dollars into the industry. That would be $2.19 billion today. Smoking, just do it.
Would you care for a cocktail or one of our tropical fruit drinks? We have a Mai Tai, a Kon-Tiki, or a Flaming Virgin.
I'll take a Kon-Tiki extra bitters, and maybe a pack of Winstons. That's probably what that guy said, not me. That's right. If you sat in the smoking section, you could light up at will. Hey, flight attendants would even help you. But don't worry, there were smoking sections, and that smoke wasn't allowed past the smoking section. So, of course, in reality, the entire plane was the smoking section since there was no physical barrier. A dark cloud of secondhand smoke wafted through the cabin. Travelers dressed up for air travel back then, but their nice clothes reeked of cigarettes by the time the plane landed. In fact, in-flight smoking wasn't banned until 1990, and that was only on flights within the US. It would be another 10 years before smoking was banned on international flights, which is crazy recent. All this taken together, it's enough to make you wonder how we've managed to survive this long at all.